Welcome to Check the Energy podcast and the special Vitality series within it, where I get to bring on all sorts of guests who share their specialty within the area of vitality and explore how we can optimize our vitality individually and as a collective. So I am so looking forward to the conversation today. And as you may know, if you've tuned into any of these podcasts, I always like to start with the relational, like where did I get connected with this guest? And so I want to share a bit with you about Lindsay. I found her on LinkedIn, and I'm not even sure where the connection initially happened, but I tell you, she is a bright spot in my LinkedIn experience thus far. And I'm going to tell you why. There's something so grounding and so, I want to say, expansive when you find someone that shares that can articulate their expertise with this funny phrase is coming to mind, but with exquisite precision. Like, I look for this woman's posts on LinkedIn and I learn something new every time. And not only that, because, we'll go into her background in just a moment, but it's not only that, I feel more grounded after I read these posts. It really pulls me out of, any of the energies that can sort of take you into different places when you're online. It really is a reminder for me and for all of us to curate who you bring into your inner circle from that online perspective, right? Like who we pay attention to and consume content from. It needs to be nourishing content. And that's what I find with Lindsay. And so I'm really grateful. I actually reached out to her and said, please be on my podcast. And she graciously said yes. So with that introduction, I would love to have her introduce herself, share a bit about your background, and then we'll go from there.
Oh, thank you for that introduction, and I appreciate your reflection on what you think of the content I'm putting out there. And I really do try to um, keep things grounded and keep things useful. And that's also my work as an herbalist. And one of my last teachers, her main teacher, Tommy Bass, who's known by the Smithsonian, he's a Southern folk practitioner who's, well past. It was years ago that he passed, many years ago. And but that's what his work was. It's that herbs and foods and life ways were to give ease. And that's really the core of my work, is to give ease.
Mm.
So I try to do that in every way possible, including the content I put online, because there's enough that is causing people such great distress. And I think that's just a little something that we can do for each other right now. So I did get into this work. I had a conventional upbringing in mostly New Orleans and Mississippi for the longest time. I think that's also where my groundedness comes from. Mississippi has a lot of complex history. And at the same time, I feel very proud to be a Mississippian, because people are really grounded and really down to earth, and time moves at a pace that you typically find when you travel to other undeveloped countries. And it's something that I actually appreciate about it. And I draw on that. And I am a seventh generation of the county that I was raised in Mississippi. And so I went to undergrad for print journalism with a focus in photography, and then went into Peace Corps. And while I was in Peace Corps in Ukraine, I went through a health crisis, and that was about 2001, which spun my world inside out and upside down. And then the rest of my life has been recovering from that. So, that's well over 20 years now. And I ended up in the Bay Area after Peace Corps, and thank goodness that's where, for whatever reason, that's where me and my boyfriend from Oregon ended up. And I said to myself, well, if I can live in Ukraine and Czech Republic, then I think I can live anywhere in the US. And that's how I ended up in the Bay Area. And the Bay Area really was what put me on track with my work in herbalism, in soul work, and dream work, in human environmental connection and healing. It really, Bay Area is quite different now, but at that time in the early 2000s, it was just the place to be for these things. Mm-hmm. And I learned a tremendous amount, and I met some fascinating people. So my first herb teacher and my first yoga teacher, my first journey with meditation in the Zen community there. It was a wonderful place to really create a lot of traction in my life with these healing modalities and what I offer people today. It's basically a distillation of all those years.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I always love hearing the journey of not just the journey of the healing journey, but also the locational journey. I personally find that fascinating of where people end up relocating. I feel like we really have a deep connection with the earth. I know that I do. I have felt a strong geographical connection with every place that I've been in. It's interesting that you mentioned about the Bay Area. I was there the same time that you were there, the early 2000s. And that was the time when I went into becoming a massage therapist and getting really involved with a local healers community. And it really did have quite, I want to say, a burst open of opportunity around healing and transformation in that time that you mentioned. So I recall that well. And it also interesting to me that you mentioned you have a boyfriend from Oregon that you moved to the Bay Area with. And after the Bay Area, I ended up in Oregon before I ended up in Europe. So it's we have a lot of crossover with the geography there. So that was just fun to realize. I would love to ask if you're okay with sharing what happened? Like, what is it that you're still healing from for 20 years, and how have you addressed that? What has been most effective for you?
Mm-hmm. Well, in the beginning, it was, outright physical ailments. And now I would say, and I'll describe that, but now it's more fine tuning and digging into the origins of how I actually arrived at that point to have that serious of a health crisis. So I basically went through psychosis, and it was triggered by marijuana, and I had it before a few times, and so this was unusual. And my boyfriend at the time didn't experience what I did, so we've ruled out that it was laced or something. So I think it was just, perfect storm doesn't quite capture the essence of it, but it was that created. I think my health had already been declining. I had been experiencing a little depression, and I felt like there wasn't nutrition. I wasn't getting the amount of nutrition I needed. Something was up with absorption. And it could have been that I had not celiac, but an allergy or an intolerance, and I wasn't aware of that. And that was creating the lack of proper absorption of nutrients. But this experience catapulted everything to a new level. And one thing I like to tell people is that marijuana does increase the space of the cells. So it makes your tissues more permeable, especially the GI. So if you're already experiencing leaky gut, this will exacerbate that.
Oh, wow.
So I think what happened with me was this exacerbation of pre-existing condition. So I was having heart palpitations and dizzy spells, severe depression, intrusive thoughts, just strange burping sensations in my chest cavity, tingling sensations in fingers and toes and around the lips and eyes, near hyperventilation all the time. So, and I did have one extreme panic attack, which I still don't know if it was a panic attack or if it was actually a cytokine storm or potentially a thyroid storm. Because I was on a tram in Czech Republic and I doubled over and I was just, it was like my heart was just leaping out of my chest. And I just remember doubling over and catching myself. And then, this is just me at that time. I felt like I was just trying to do the best I could. But I went and still taught my English lesson that day. So, I mean, I remember I went to a doctor in Czech Republic and I listed all of those things I just told you, and she told me to drink more green tea. That was her suggestion. So I felt, well, I mean, it's not invasive, but it's not what I need. And then the doctor in Mississippi that I went to wanted to put me on birth control. So I am just lucky that I ended up in the Bay Area and I started seeing an herbalist. And he gave me a tincture that was hawthorn and passion flower. And I began to sleep a little better. I forgot. I was also experiencing insomnia and nightmares. So this is like the dark night of the soul. I mean, and later I uncovered childhood trauma and I started putting the pieces together and working on some transgenerational trauma. And part of my work is also ancestor work, lineage-based work, and work with the actual land and earth. So something you spoke of in terms of land connection and that familiarity and that importance and relevance. And absolutely, that's something that is part of the journey for people in terms of healing. So I started working on those obvious physical symptoms so I could stabilize my nervous system and stabilize my digestive system and stabilize my immune system. And then eventually the rest has been fine tuning. And I would say the bulk of the work was really like 4 years of really intensive, focused work. And also, when my symptoms were at their worst.
Yeah.
So when people say, oh, I'd love to get into herbalism, oh, you know so much. I'm like, honestly, you don't want to pay the price that I did to be involved this deeply in the work that I do. So look, just learn what you can and enjoy it. And hopefully, you get into herbalism through a different door than I had to take.
Yeah.
So, but yeah. But I, now because of this work with plants, I feel indebted to them and I feel I'm just an advocate for plants and I'm an advocate for understanding botanical medicine and I'm an advocate for, the herbal arts.
And what if they taught you? Being an advocate, I would assume that there's a sense of not just service to them and service through you of them to others, but I would assume that there's a messenger component of being an advocate for plants. Clearly, you're a strong writer. What are some of the messages that they've really brought to and through you?
Well, I'm still learning and paying attention, but I will say this, that they're very generous and they are very abundant. And at the same time, they definitely feel like people aren't paying attention to them. And many of them, are feeling orphaned. We have a lot of invasive and naturalized species and ornamentals, and a lot of those feel misunderstood. And, plants in general are feeling there's that lack of relationship. Like people aren't showing up. The plants are showing up and they're like, I'm right here. I've got so much to offer. Why aren't you paying attention to me? And that's the message I get from them the strongest.
Mm, mm. So how, okay, there's two things that just popped in as you were speaking that. One is the obvious question is how can we start to develop that relationship with them more intentionally? There's that. And also, just because I want to put the seed there and I don't want to forget about it, is I noticed when I started to pay more attention to plants that there was an abundance of certain plants in certain areas that needed that medicine of the plant. Like there, certain areas where dandelions are abundant, and it tends to be an area that needs a little more liver support or detox, or has a sort of energy that you would associate with like liver health and detoxing, right? And so I started to notice these patterns with the herbs. I'm new to all of it, but I feel them wanting my attention. I feel them calling my name. And so I'm just starting to slowly notice at heart, I'm a tree. I'm a tree woman. Like I make a beeline for the trees in the health food stores, usually, trees, gardens, and health food stores. And so plants are new to my circle, but I hear them very loudly. So if you could speak to either of those, I would love to hear.
Yeah. So, and you're asking about the messages that they could be giving, including like how they're located and where they are.
And also how can we start to develop that relationship with them? How can we
Yeah.
notice the messages that they're giving us? Where do we start with all of that?
Yeah. Well, I love that question. And then I feel like you almost answered, the first one, because what you started doing is you started noticing. And really, for plants, that's just it. It's the awareness. I remember when I first got into herbalism, I would go on hikes and literally I would just remember the brown path, the green wall of plants, and the blue sky.
Mhm.
And literally, that was it. And when I speak of plants, I'm also including trees, just all green things. I'm calling plants. But so when I started noticing and when I started learning about plant medicine, I would go on hikes, and then all of a sudden I was noticing each and every pebble on the path, or at least it had definition. And then the plants were more technicolor and they were layered and three-dimensional, and I was noticing them.
Mm.
And I think just like in any craft, like same with dreams and dream work, when you start noticing them, when you start writing them down and paying attention to dreams, you start building a better friendship and a relationship with those dreams. They offer you more. And it's the same with plants. So we start paying attention to them, we start seeing them, we start being curious. Maybe we'll rub the leaves and sniff them. Maybe we'll take a little taste of the leaf. Maybe like you were doing with the dandelion, you'll notice where they like to congregate, and you'll notice what they like to, what other plants they like to be near.
Mhm.
And you start making those connections. So I think that awareness and presence and just sitting and taking time to notice them will be the absolute best first step.
Mm, mm, mm. I love that. Thank you. Yeah. I I am already thinking of different spots in my neighborhood that I want to slow down. The way that you speak about that and the intentional connection with noticing feels like a paradigm shift around our natural rhythm and our relationship with time, because
Mm.
there's a different sense of of time and timelessness and cycles and the natural cycle and the natural rhythm. And I feel like these are key concepts that need to be forefront when it comes to optimizing our vitality, right? We are existing in a model that is really running us ragged, and that's not acceptable to me. And it's taken a lot, at least on my part, and I don't know if I've ever actually in my 50 young years of living have ever had a um mainstream kind of job. It's just not suited for my personality. And so, but I still feel the kind of lockdown of the 9 to 5 mentality. And I feel like communing and connecting with plants would start to heal that just automatically because you're in a different kind of time zone. It's like nature's time zone. I don't know if anything comes up for you or you want to speak to that at all. I don't really have a question, but that's what came through for me as I was thinking about intentionally cultivating that relationship with the plant world and how
Yeah.
needed that is.
Well, I think they are a good window because you can find them everywhere. So if you're out in the world, it is like a meditation practice, and they can bring you back to center just by being present with them.
Yeah.
I remember Nam Singh. I don't know if you knew of him in the Bay Area, but he was a Taoist practitioner, and Taoist cooking and herbs and very traditional that way. And I remember him saying that eat like 5% wild every day.
Mm.
And I really love that because then you really are paying attention to the plants around you. And, even just picking up the dandelion flower and eating some of the petals or the leaves, that could be your little bit of wild every day. And I think there is something really brilliant about the wild phytochemistry because plants, they can't run away, they can't, just trot off to another country. Well, they can over generations, or if they're taken by seed, but really they have to defend themselves where they are. So their defense mechanisms are allowing them to stay grounded and stay put. And they have, a very complex phytochemistry, each plant does. And there really are only, the only plant I'm really nervous about people maybe nibbling on would be hemlock, poison hemlock.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that's not one to mess with. And it's in the wild, in the carrot family. And but pretty much all your common weeds, especially the ones coming up in spring, and so many plants and many leaves of trees can just be nibbled on just a little bit. And we can get that taste, that inoculation of the wild in us. And not only would it be the plants themselves, but it would be a lot of times soil-based organisms on those plants too. I always think it's funny that probiotics now they have soil-based organisms, SBOs, in their probiotics. And I was like, well, that's just organisms in the dirt. So, it's people know how important these are for the health of our digestive system, for the health of our immune system. So, and just interacting with wild plants, you can look at it very scientifically based on the beneficial microorganisms, or you can look at it, very poetically, that you're infusing your being with the vitality and the intelligence of this great diversity of plants that we have out in the world. So, and I think that is just extremely poetic. That you're tasting the wild, that you're bringing in these feral and wild and vital aspects of of the world around us, and we're sealing that bond. We're doing this ritual act that brings us together every day just by taking that little nibble.
Mm, mm. That's beautiful. That was really beautiful to listen to and envision. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to expand on this idea, oh gosh, there's I'm like, which direction do I want to go with? Because I love this idea of wildness and reclaiming the wildness. Uh, and I also want to talk about these different areas that you incorporate into your work, right? So you've got the herbalism, then you've got the soul work, then you've got the nourishment or the life ways. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Traditional food ways is part
traditional
of
food
it.
ways. Yeah. And then there's, under this also umbrella of being trauma informed, right? After having gone through your own journey, it feels very much like I'm noticing a lot of hybrid healers emerging where they're really taking these different, yeah, I feel still almost too clinical to call them modalities, but the medicinal arts, right? And bringing them together in this really comprehensive, integrated way, and then using that as service. I think that's really beautiful and really unique. And so if you could just speak to the variety of what you do and how that all plays into creating vitality.
Yeah, well, I noticed with my clients, this certain language was emerging, and it wasn't just about giving them herbs. And of course, a good herbalist will start with foods first. So food and diet and hydration and, things like that. I'm always looking at that, making sure I've got that, uh, an understanding with the client that I'm working with before I'm just, dispensing all kinds of herbs. So that traditional food ways and nourishment, that was pretty natural progression. And then there was another really natural progression, especially with ancestor work with my clients, because I don't have a very complex form, but I do ask them to tell me the history of their mother's side and the father's side of their family. And always a conversation, we would reach that point and there would be so much coming up for people, and very, very emotional experiences I've had with people that were completely unexpected for me and for them. And they're like, well, and it would just happen over and over. And I realized that, the heart of the work was really having them contextualize their life in the ancestry shed, with the whole picture of their lineage, and then finding out, what it was that they were working with in that context. So many people hadn't oriented themselves in their family lineage yet. They didn't have that, they didn't have a map. And so they would hit these really strong sensations when talking about, the mother lineage or a father lineage, and they knew that's where they needed to go. I mean, I had one client that was diagnosed with Graves and was getting regular thyroid panels, and she said, look, I don't want to take these thyroid medications. And I said, well, that's your choice, and I'm just here to help you. So let's see what we can do. And she saw a lot of, thyroid and autoimmune stuff on her mother's lineage. And, I didn't hear from her for years. And I gave her these herb recommendations, and I started talking to her. I was like, there's something there on your mother's side, and I don't know what it is, but can you go talk to your family? She calls me back. She emails me 3 years later. She said, look, I'm in this herb course and I'm becoming an herbalist too. And I'm doing a presentation on trauma and herbalism, and I want to ask you some questions. And I'm like, oh, well, goodness, there you are. But I didn't recognize the name totally. I was like, well, your name has changed. And so anyway, we caught up, and she had changed her name. She had surfaced her late aunt who had passed away, and she had been the black sheep of the family. She said that she was the one in healing arts and she was a bit different, and the family wouldn't speak of her. And so this client of mine had decided to bring those stories up and really claim them, and she took her name.
Oh,
She
wow.
changed her name.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, her thyroid panels were normal. You know, was it the herbs? Was it the, you know, the life ways? You know, was it this ancestral work that she decided to do? I mean, I just gave her permission and I said, hey, look, there's something right here. She was the one who dove in and did the work. So, but I think it was that recognition and that permission to see that this could be connected to what she's experiencing. So then, I mean, my work started naturally moving into that lineage-based work. One of my hobbies is DNA-based genealogy, and I love genealogy. I love to learn about history pretty much only through the lens of genealogy. Otherwise, I find it extremely irrelevant. And but through the lens of genealogy and through people's narratives, I'm just fascinated with history. And I think that you know, so many people that had come to me or have come to me over the years, they just said, you know, nobody's asked me about my family history. And I know they're getting a little bit better than that at that in conventional settings, but there's still little boxes that people check. I think it's important just to leave it open, you know, just tell me about your mother's side, tell me about your mother's health, tell me about your father's health. Like, just leave it open, because I think what surfaces for people, especially in the moment that they're seeking support themselves, the answers, they come to the surface. You know, people know. A lot of times I feel like it's that permission and that affirmation, that recognition.
So I think that's really, really fascinating, actually, the link to our lineage. It's something that I feel is so obvious and yet often overlooked. And so I'm curious, do most people that come to you have an awareness that there's some stuff there for them to unpack?
Yes.
And how do you guide them in that?
Well, I ask them questions, and then the information typically surfaces by what they're sharing, and they often are the one making that realization. And yeah, so I feel that yeah, people, they know. They just want that affirmation. And they don't get that in the conventional setting. They really don't. So it's unusual for them to be in the situation and receive that. And I mean, I have just heard so many incredible stories. And then I'm looking at this person, hearing what they've been through and what their ancestors have been through. And I'm like, bravo. It's amazing. I mean, it truly is amazing that you just the stories that our bodies are holding, and the resiliency and that ability to just keep showing up. It's amazing to me. I actually don't watch movies. I really don't watch TV. And I mean, I don't. But Henry Louis Gates has a PBS show called Finding Your Roots. And he has mostly their stars or their TV cast people or their sports people, and he'll do their family tree for them. And I just gobble that show up. I'm often crying, I'm just like, if they at all start sniffing, I'm like, oh, it just moves me so deeply. It is honestly a profound thing when these stories that have been asleep for so long are given oxygen again. Same thing like the plants.
Yeah.
Same thing like the dreams. The ancestors are the same way. And I will say this, we do know that Christianity, as it has spread from place to place, it does not want you revering your ancestors. That was the way that they disempowered rural communities, is they shifted the reverence from the ancestors to their saints. And it is a power source in its own right. But when you have a geographical group of people still honoring and paying tribute to their ancestors of that place, that is that is a huge source of power and honor and dignity. So, yeah, like a friend of mine, it's happening right now. She's from Michoacan, where the Oyamel forest is and the monarch butterflies go in the winter. I mean, it's just a magical place, but also riddled with a lot of crime right now. But she was told by the missionaries that went in there that they weren't to observe Dia de los Muertos, which is revering the ancestors and, that kind of thing. So it still is happening. And I think it is very destabilizing and disempowering, because when we stop putting their pictures up, which that is a recent thing with the advent of photography and whatever, the early 1800s. But, when we stop thinking about the ancestors, when we stop telling their stories, when we stop recounting their journeys, however challenging or difficult, shameful or successful, those stories compound in our lives, and they're still with us. They're still very much a part of us and our DNA, but we have this amnesia and this ignorance that blinds us from, the actual details of those stories. So I think by doing ancestor work and talking to our family system and uncovering those stories, there's a lot of, like I said, dignity and honor and self-awareness that we get from that practice.
And it also, as you're speaking about that, it also reminds me of healing the wound of isolationism. Like, it's like we have been sort of primed to be disconnected from the lineage, disconnected from the plants, disconnected from ourselves. And so we can't, when we exist in this sort of hollowed out structure of our lives that doesn't have roots or connection to the external energetic and spiritual world in such a way that is nourishing to us, that's going to be, like you said, very destabilizing and also a real drain on vitality, right? It's like we have a very like one-dimensional model, like, oh, just eat and exercise. It's not that at all. Like there is a relational importance of like locating ourselves within the context of these various different environments. And so that's what comes through for me as I was listening to you talk about that. So really just beautiful, and I think super important for people to bear in mind that regardless of whatever you've experienced with your family of origin, for better or for worse, that there is that lineage thread, that larger contextual and spiritual thread that is that is holding you, this web that's holding you
Yes.
energetically. And yeah, you know, we're meant to have that be a part of our own web of vitality, I believe. So thank you for speaking to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that we're getting near our closing out time. So I just want to ask if there's any other pieces that you would like to bring forward around vitality. And if yes, great. And if not, then now is a great time to share more of where people can find you and anything else that you would like to just to close out our conversation today.
Yeah, people can find me at lindsaykolasa.com. Um, and I think my closing words, it's interesting when you were talking about, you know, our locality and orienting ourselves. I think I invite people to, figure out where the east direction is and where their water comes from, and what's the water reservoir, or is it well water, or do they get it from a spring, or just learn about that watershed, and to make as many relationships as possible, because I think that is the antidote to our times, is creating these relationships, with these things that our bodies are interacting with. So, and really dig into those relationship-based aspects to our life, which is everything. I mean, even with my I have a wood stove, and when I talk to the fire like it's my friend.
Yeah.
So, so there's always an opportunity for relationship, and there's always an opportunity for a dignified relationship.
Beautiful. Thank you. I think that's a lovely place to close out. So I appreciate everything that you shared today. I know that I feel richer for this conversation. So thanking you for your time, and thanking everyone who is either watching or listening for tuning in to the Check the Energy podcast and the Vitality series. I look forward to being back with you again soon with another guest. Please do check out Lindsay online and enjoy her writing as much as I do. And with that, take care, and we'll see you again soon.